They said the sun was the eye of the gods, and when that eye closed, the world trembled with unease. In the late autumn of 190 BCE, a sudden eclipse cloaked the skies over the Italian peninsula. At high noon, a dark shadow crept across the brilliant sky. Merchants halted their trades in the marketplace, soldiers paused their drills outside the Colosseum, and the Senate chamber fell into a hush. Romans stood in the forum, staring upward, terrified as the sun was swallowed. They had no scientific explanation, only a deep-rooted belief. This was a divine warning, and misfortune was near. In the early years of the Roman Republic, celestial signs were inseparable from politics and religion. Any deviation from the natural order, especially eclipses, was seen as a sacred omen. The Romans believed the cosmos was a stage for divine will, with the gods speaking through stars and shadows. Their annals, chronicles, and temple records frequently mention black suns and blood moons, each tightly bound to war, plague, or political upheaval. One of the earliest records comes from around 350 BCE, when a lunar eclipse occurred on the eve of a critical Senate debate. The next day, chaos erupted. Powerful nobles clashed in violent confrontations within the chamber. The priests later declared the moon goddess was expressing displeasure at their arrogance and sacrilege. From then on, every eclipse was followed by purification rituals in the Senate to prevent divine wrath from infecting the body politic. Solar eclipses were feared most of all, for the sun symbolized supreme authority among the Roman gods. Sol, the sun god, stood for light, life, justice, order, and conquest. When the sun was devoured in broad daylight, it signified more than an astronomical event. It foretold the collapse of political power. If Sol could not uphold celestial order, how could Rome maintain hers? An eclipse was thus read as a harbinger of chaos, the fall of leaders, or invasions from beyond the borders. A well-known tale tells of the eve before the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. Rome had already suffered defeat at the hands of Hannibal, and morale was crumbling. A solar eclipse fell across the land. The sky turned black, and day became dusk. Soldiers trembled in their tents, unwilling to fight, believing the gods had abandoned them. Though commanders insisted it was a natural phenomenon, fear had rooted deep. The next day, the Roman army suffered a devastating defeat. A historian later wrote, "The battle was lost the moment the sun vanished." The fear of eclipses also became a tool of manipulation. Some politicians would proclaim divine dreams coinciding with celestial events, using them to pass laws, incite wars, or remove rivals. Among the public, this was effective when the heavens spoke. Few dared to argue. By the later Republic, fear of the skies reached its zenith. Each eclipse became a spark within Rome's political storm. Perhaps, to them, the silence of the sun was more severe than any decree. And when the sunlight finally broke through the shadow, pouring back over temples and streets, the people cheered. But in their hearts, the silence of the sun had left its mark, a brief, profound conversation between gods and men. In the heart of Rome's public squares stood a unique class of people who always looked skyward. They were not poets nor astronomers, but Augurs priests of omens and divine signs. For centuries across the Republic and Empire, they ascended the highest temple steps, raised their ritual staffs, and traced invisible windows in the sky, known as the templum, to define the space where divine will could be revealed. They believed that between the cosmos and the human world lay a hidden membrane, and only through precise rituals could one glimpse the intentions of the gods. Among all celestial signs, eclipses were the heaviest revelations of all. Augury had its roots in Etruscan culture. Long before Rome's rise, this ancient civilization tied the heavens to divine will. The Romans inherited and systematized this belief, weaving it into state religion and law. Every significant event, whether electing a leader, declaring war, building temples, passing legislation, or holding a Senate session, required the augurs to observe the skies and declare whether auspicia fausta, favorable omens, were present. The duties of an augur extended beyond bird flight patterns. They studied lightning, comets, errant stars, and eclipses. These were understood as divine speech, each anomaly with a codified meaning. A solar eclipse in their symbolic lexicon meant the sun god refuses to give light, or the king of gods withdraws. Such signs were grave. They could pause state decisions, delay campaigns, or require days-long purification rites to atone for cosmic disfavor. Historical records abound with cases of augurs vetoing national plans due to eclipses. In 143 BCE, Consul Lucius Hostilius prepared for a campaign against Parthia. Troops were assembled, sacrifices ready. But on the eve of departure, the augurs foresaw a coming eclipse and declared the campaign not divinely permitted. They refused to perform the blessing ritual. Without it, the army could not march. Though Lucius fumed, he could not defy the sacred verdict of the augurs. Augury was not merely a spiritual act, it was a pillar of political power. Under the Republic, only state-recognized augurs could interpret the will of the gods. Their judgments carried legal authority. No general, consul, or senator could overrule them. Their exclusive communion with the divine made them an unseen but potent force in Roman politics. And the eclipse aurare, dramatic, terrifying, was a token they wielded with particular gravity, balancing power and mediating crisis. Yet this authority did not go unchallenged. In the Imperial era, certain emperors sought to weaken the augurs' influence, replacing them with court-appointed astrologers. But among the people, the old language of augury still held sway. When faced with inexplicable eclipses, the populace trusted those who heard the whispers of the gods. Perhaps to an augur, every eclipse was not an end, but a door. A door opened by the divine, piercing the heavens, allowing mortals to brush against the eternal land, prompting a nation to reevaluate its path on the edge of chaos. As the breath of the Republic faded, a new sun rose on the horizon. His name was Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. With the rise of the empire, the relationship between the divine and the political subtly shifted. The augur's grip on interpreting divine will began to loosen, and eclipses those ancient omens were recast in a new imperial light. Augustus understood the symbolic power of the heavens. He not only upheld the Republic's reverence for omens, but rebranded himself as the guardian of cosmic order. His rule was steeped in a sacred narrative. He was not a usurper, but a chosen vessel of divine will, the bringer of peace. To maintain this divine legitimacy, celestial signs became tools of imperial theater, and eclipses transformed into sacred crises he had to master. In 9 BCE, a solar eclipse blanketed northern Rome just as Augustus dispatched legions to suppress rebellion along the Germanic frontier. Though military reports were favorable, public fear surged. The Senate convened an emergency session. Official augurs publicly declared, "The eclipse is no omen of doom, but a trial of light." Augustus had stone tablets placed across the city, inscribed with the oracle, "The sun hides, testing Rome's resolve. Only the faithful shall welcome its return." This turned panic into reverence, reinforcing Augustus's image as one in harmony with the divine. During this imperial period, the heavens were woven into the cult of emperor worship. Augustus incorporated celestial symbols into architecture and engraved stars, sun chariots, and gods onto his coinage. implying his alignment with the cosmos. Citizens were constantly reminded the emperor was not merely a ruler, was a living embodiment of divine order. Thus, an eclipse no longer foretold disaster. It became a test of imperial divinity. But not every emperor wielded this symbolism wisely. Under Nero, an eclipse occurred shortly after he began purging the Senate's elite. His astrologers labeled it a turning of fate, but the public was unconvinced. Whispers spread, "The sun cannot bear his deeds, so it closes its eye." The historian Tacitus remarked coldly, "The heavens speak not, yet they are understood." At that moment, the eclipse became a silent indictment of tyranny. Domitian, attempting to mimic Augustus's celestial grandeur, introduced a belief system centered around an imperial star. But his paranoia betrayed him. He imprisoned all court astronomers, forbade private discussions of omens, and ordered citywide blackouts during eclipses, hoping to hide the god's gaze. Yet suppression only bred suspicion. The heavens could not be caged. In the Roman mind, attempting to control divine signs bordered on blasphemy. As the empire waned, eclipses began to shift in meaning from state omens to prophetic signs in rising religions. Christianity offered a new interpretation. Church fathers spoke of eclipses as portents of the end of earthly kingdoms and the coming judgment of the Lord. In the Gospel of Matthew, solar darkness was already woven into the vision of apocalypse. Thus, a new era dawned. The meaning of the heavens never stood still. In the Republic, eclipses were divine wrath. In the Empire, they were tests of sovereignty. In a new faith, they became pages of revelation. But under every eclipse, Romans stood still, gazing into the darkness, seeking answers written in shadow. On the night of a solar eclipse, if you wandered through a small Roman village beyond the city's edge, you might hear the whispers of elders mingling with the cries of frightened children, not out of ignorance of science, but from reverence for old memories. Beneath the imperial grandeur, countless ordinary Roman farmers, potters, tavern maids, fishmongers still looked skyward and saw eclipses as signs of cosmic disorder. Their fears were not carved into stone, but lived on in street ballads and spoken tales. To them, an eclipse was never a symbolic abstraction. It was a real threat to their homes, livestock, crops, and children. In the Sabine highlands, grandmothers would whisper to their grandchildren, "The sun has been devoured. The gods are warning yous offer the oxen, lest plague befall us." They lit bonfires and banged pots and pans, hoping noise would drive away the devouring shadow. In these stories, an eclipse wasn't just a natural event, it was a battle in the skies. The sun trapped in a net of darkness, awaiting rescue through mortal clamor and prayer. These rituals blended Etruscan legacies, Latin folk beliefs, and even tribal totem traditions from Italy's ancient hills. They never entered the empire's official theology. But like underground streams, they nourished a folk cosmology that survived in Roman hearts. During eclipses, the air itself seemed to hum with tension as if gods crept along the rooftops echoes of a belief system older than Rome itself. Some villages even developed their own traditions of eclipse prophecy. In parts of Campania, people used black sun cards, a folk card game passed down by elders based on celestial patterns, dreams, and family lore. They claimed that drawing certain cards during an eclipse foretold whether the next year would bring harvest or hardship, war or peace. Though modern eyes might dismiss it as superstition, at the time it was a way to bind communities and pass on memory. The historian Livy once remarked, "In fear, the people invent solace and thus dream in the void. Yet such dreams are themselves a form of truth. They reflect the collective psyche of an empire's lower Tirsa language of the spirit born from powerlessness before the cosmos. For them, sunlight did not come from orbit and rotation, but from divine favor. When that light vanished, so too did all protection. Even soldiers on Rome's farthest edges recorded similar sentiments. A centurion stationed in northern Britannia noted during an eclipse, "I raised my sword to the sky, and light did not return. The camp tonight is silent. None sing. They say the Reaper walks among us." This brief entry lacked astronomical understanding, but laid bare the rawest of human instincts. This was the Roman folk memory of the sky, not one of precise calculations or political symbols, but of stories told around fires, in taverns, in furrowed fields. Tales of a sun that lost its way, of gods who went silent, of shadows that fell and withdrew with the dawn's first breath. These memories, unwritten in chronicles and uninscribed by Senate decree, were another face of Roman civilization. A simpler yet more profound truth, that in the face of vast darkness, humanity is small, and an eclipse is the sky's way of reminding us. The fall of the empire was like a mountain slowly sinking, quiet, relentless, folding day by day into the ruins it had forged. And when Western Rome finally slipped into the long night of history in 476 CE, the golden sun mosaics that once shimmered on domes seemed to dim and vanish with it. Yet eclipses did not end. They returned to the heavens with clockwork precision. But in a world without the Senate or Caesar, people began to see them differently. No longer war drums of divine intent, they became moments for deeper reflection. In Byzantium, monks charted eclipses as part of an apocalyptic clock, whispering passages from Revelation in the silence of cloistered halls. In icons of the Orthodox Church, the black sun was no longer the eye of doom, but the gate of return, a silent prelude to final judgment. In the West, as Christianity deepened its hold, eclipses shifted from public to personal experience. Priests preached, "When the sun goes blind, it is time for the soul to see." Eclipses moved inward. No longer signs of state, they became mirrors of faith and fear. In the margins of monastic manuscripts, dark discs were sketched, with quiet notes reading, "Dies absconditus est," the day the light hid. These strokes lacked the grandeur of Senate inscriptions, but in their soft ink recorded a new kind of truth. People no longer drove away the darkness with noise, they closed their eyes and prayed beneath it. And the old gods of Rome? They had sunk into the sediment of memory. Yet perhaps their echoes remain, in forgotten valleys, cracked temples, or beneath grass-covered amphitheaters. When an eclipse returns, these places might stir in the darkness, recalling a time when they stood at the world's heart. Today, standing beneath glass towers and peering through digital telescopes, we believe we're closer to the truth than the ancients. But perhaps the opposite is true. In this age of calculation and data, we may be further from that poetic resonance with the cosmos. The world the ancients built from fear, prayer, and myth may, in some hidden way, be nearer the silent order behind celestial motion. The Romans' weather-armored generals or pot-banging grandmother Saul once looked up when darkness fell at noon, and in that trembling silence, they heard another voice of time. We may never know if they truly understood the will of the heavens, but we know they tried with all their heart to listen. Now we emerge from the ruins of Rome, passing through the echoes of temples, stepping across 1,000 years of legend, standing at the edge between light and shadow. The faded inscriptions, the nights written with prayer and fear, The moments once seen as divine wrath may today be nothing more than the rhythm of the stars. Yet to the Romans, they were revelation. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Perhaps next time you look up at the sky and see the black sun devour the day, you'll remember those ancient voices whispering in silence, trying to read the dark, not with reason, but with reverence. Not just a celestial event, but a quiet murmur of what it means to be human.